I've been married for a few years now. It's not that I don't love my husband, but something about our relationship has changed. There's an emptiness I can't quite shake, a longing that has no name. At the beginning, we were so in tune with each other, passionate, excited to be together. But somewhere along the way, the fire died. It wasn't anyone's fault. It just faded. We still have the same routine, the same conversations, but something's missing. That's when I met him. I wasn't looking for anything, just a friendly conversation here and there, a few shared laughs, but it turned into something else. He was new at work, and his presence was intoxicating. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. His charm was subtle but powerful, and every time we spoke, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in so long. I thought it was harmless at first, a little harmless flirtation that would fade away. But it didn't. The conversations turned deeper, more intimate. We started sharing personal stories, vulnerabilities I hadn't shared with anyone in years. I found myself looking forward to our talks, replaying every word in my head long after they ended. I told myself it was just an escape, just a harmless distraction. But when we crossed the line, when the kiss happened, I didn't know how to pull myself back. Guilt should have come instantly, but it didn't. Instead, I felt alive. It wasn't right, but it felt good. I thought it was just a one-time thing, something I would brush off and forget, but every time we met after that, it became harder to stay away. The connection we shared was undeniable, something raw and real that I hadn't felt in so long. With him, I felt seen. I felt desired. He didn't look at me like a wife, a mother, or someone's partner. He looked at me like I was everything he ever wanted. And that, after years of feeling invisible, was intoxicating. At home, things weren't getting better. I loved my husband, but the passion had been replaced by routine. We didn't fight, but we didn't speak much either. The silence was comfortable, but also suffocating. When I was with my lover, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a breath of fresh air. And somehow, I convinced myself that it was okay. But my stepson noticed. He's not a child anymore. He's observant, smart. He's not the type to speak up right away, but I could feel him watching me. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me, like he knew something, made my stomach twist. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was just projecting my own guilt onto him. But I wasn't wrong. There were moments when I caught him staring, his expression hard to read. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. Was I just being paranoid, or was he starting to put the pieces together? Either way, I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The affair was my escape. It was my way to feel something, anything other than the void I felt at home. My mind told me it was a mistake, but my body craved more. But with every stolen kiss, every secret rendezvous, the consequences of my actions felt heavier. I couldn't run from it forever. I knew the truth would catch up to me, especially with my stepson growing more distant, more silent. But I told myself that I wasn't hurting anyone. After all, my husband had no idea, and my stepson wasn't saying anything. For now, I could keep living in the illusion that it would never come to light. But deep down, I knew it was just a matter of time. As the days passed, the weight of the secret grew heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something, someone. Was it my husband? Was it my stepson? Or was it myself? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. The affair was no longer a secret between just him and me. It was something I was carrying everywhere, like a weight that was slowly suffocating me. It started as a spark, something exciting and new, but now it was consuming every thought I had. Every time I was with him, the world outside felt distant, irrelevant. There was no escaping the thrill that came with sneaking around, but the more I did it, the more I realized how much I was losing in the process. My husband didn't deserve this, and neither did my stepson. Yet I kept going. At first, I tried to justify my actions. I told myself it was just a temporary escape. My husband and I were fine, just a little disconnected. But that was a lie. I wasn't just bored with my marriage. I was searching for something that I wasn't finding at home. I wasn't even sure what that something was anymore. Maybe it was passion, maybe it was attention, or maybe it was the simple feeling of being wanted. But in the arms of my lover, I found what I needed, even if it wasn't real. At least, it felt real in the moment. As the affair continued, I became more reckless. The guilt started to fade into the background, overshadowed by the excitement. There were moments when I told myself I would end things, that it was just a fling, a distraction, and I would go back to my marriage, to my life. But the thrill of it, the secrecy, the stolen moments, it was too much. It became a part of me, a part one didn't know how to let go of. But things at home were starting to fall apart. My husband noticed the changes. He wasn't stupid. He didn't know the details, but he knew something was off. Our conversations were shorter, colder. The warmth we once had was replaced with tension, and I could feel it every time I looked at him. I tried to cover it up, tried to act normal, but it wasn't working. The more I distanced myself from him, the more he began to retreat into his own shell. We weren't fighting, but we weren't living together either. We were two strangers occupying the same space. Then there was my stepson. He wasn't a child anymore. He had grown into a young man, and his eyes were sharp. He watched me. I could feel it every time he entered the room, every time his gaze lingered just a second too long. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then the little things started to add up. He'd catch me on my phone, then quickly look away when I caught him looking. He would leave the room when I answered a call, or he'd glance at me when I walked in late. I didn't know if he knew what was going on, but I was certain he felt something wasn't right. I wasn't ready to face the truth. I couldn't. The affair had become too much of a part of me to just let go. But every day that passed, it became harder to keep the lie alive. I was pretending to be something I wasn't, both for my husband and my stepson. I didn't want to lose them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I already had. The longer I went without telling the truth, the more it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own deceit. The guilt gnawed at me, but not enough to stop. I loved my husband, I did, but I was living a double life, one with him and one with my lover. And neither of them knew the full truth. The lies were getting harder to manage, but I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to fix things with my husband, to go back to the way things were, but the longer I waited, the more I felt like I had lost him too. And as for my stepson, what would he think if he found out? What would he feel? I was living in the consequences of my own choices, and I knew deep down that I couldn't keep running forever. But the fear of facing it all, of owning up to the mess I had made, kept me trapped. And yet, every day, it all came crashing down when I least expected it. The accident was a blur, a moment of chaos that seemed to freeze everything around me. I had just seen him again, my lover, and we'd been careless. I should have known better, should have realized how reckless I was becoming, but in the heat of the moment, I didn't care. We were speeding, laughing, living in that bubble of excitement that always seemed to envelop us. But then, everything shifted. A sharp turn, a screeching tire, and the world spun into chaos. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a daze, my body aching from the impact. The car was totaled. I could hear the distant sounds of sirens, the muffled voices of paramedics. My mind struggled to focus as I realized that something was wrong, more wrong than the physical pain I was feeling. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't need to look to know who it was. It was him, checking in, making sure I was okay. But I wasn't okay. I felt this deep, sinking feeling in my gut. It wasn't the pain from the crash. It was the guilt, the realization of what I had been doing. My thoughts were scattered as I tried to regain my composure. I hadn't thought this through. I had been so consumed by the affair, by the rush of living in a lie, that I hadn't considered the consequences. And now, I was faced with the aftermath, the reality that my life was about to unravel in ways I couldn't predict. But there was something else, something more immediate. As the paramedics tended to me, I heard the faint sound of my stepson's voice in the background. He had found out. I didn't know how, but I knew he had. I could feel the weight of his presence before I saw him, the quiet judgment in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way his silence seemed to speak louder than any words could. I knew, in that moment, that I had lost him. I had betrayed him in the same way I had betrayed my husband, and worse, I had failed him as a mother. He didn't need to say a word for me to know that he was broken. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before: disappointment, anger, confusion. I couldn't bear to look at him. He was standing there, holding his phone, staring at me like I was a stranger. I could feel my chest tighten, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. How could I face him after everything? How could I explain this to him, knowing that I had hurt him deeply? The guilt was suffocating. I had been so wrapped up in my own desires, in my own escape, that I hadn't considered how my actions would affect him. I tried to speak, but no words came. What could I say? How could I justify what I had done, knowing that the one person I had been trying to protect had already seen through me? My stepson was no fool. He had noticed the signs long before I was ready to admit them. The late nights, the strange behavior, the way I would disappear without explanation. He had been watching me, and now I had no choice but to face the consequences of my actions. As the sirens grew louder, I realized that the accident was just the beginning. The real wreckage was yet to come. I had to face my husband, face my stepson, and somehow figure out how to live with what I had done. But there was no escaping it now. The affair had led me here, to this moment where everything was exposed, where nothing would ever be the same again. I had no idea how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. All I knew was that I couldn't keep running anymore. The truth had caught up with me, and it was time to face the damage I had caused. I couldn't avoid it anymore. The wreckage from the accident was nothing compared to the devastation I now had to face. The silence between my stepson and me was unbearable. He didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. The look he gave me was one of disbelief, disappointment, and hurt. I could feel the weight of the secrets between us pressing down on me. I didn't know where to start. How could I explain what I had done? How could I even begin to apologize for betraying his trust in a way that went beyond anything my husband could ever understand? My actions had already taken so much from him. It wasn't just the affair that had caused the rift. It was the lies, the manipulation, the way I had become someone unrecognizable. I had spent years trying to hold everything together, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. But now I realized how far off track I had gotten. The affair wasn't just an escape. It was a mask, a way to hide from the emptiness I had been carrying for so long. And in the process, I had lost everything that truly mattered. I knew I had to confront my husband. He deserved the truth. But how could I tell him? How could I look him in the eye and explain the betrayal, knowing that it might tear our entire world apart? I had no answers. The truth felt suffocating, and yet I knew I couldn't keep living this lie any longer. I had to face him, even if it meant losing him. It was inevitable. He might never forgive me, and I didn't know if I could forgive myself either. But the lies had already torn us apart. It was time to own up to my mistakes. The conversation with my stepson was even harder. How could I explain to him that I had betrayed his father, betrayed him, and destroyed the trust between us? He had always been so perceptive, always able to see through the facade I had put up.
He must have known for a long time.
And now, I was left to pick up the pieces, knowing that the damage had been done. Could we ever fix it? Would he ever be able to look at me the same way again? I didn't know, but I knew I had to try. I had to be honest, even if it meant facing the truth of my actions, however painful that truth was. As I sat there, contemplating everything, I realized how far I had fallen. The affair wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of how disconnected I had become from myself, from my family, from everything I used to care about. In trying to fill the emptiness, I had destroyed the very things that gave my life meaning. It was a harsh realization, one that I couldn't deny anymore. I had sacrificed so much, and for what? A fleeting moment of excitement? A few stolen moments of escape? It wasn't worth it. I had to take responsibility, not just for the affair, but for the hurt I had caused. I had to face my husband, face my stepson, and accept whatever came next. I didn't know if there was a way back from this, but I knew I couldn't go on pretending like everything was okay. The truth had already shattered the illusion, and all I could do now was try to make things right, if that was even possible. The road ahead would be long, and I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know if my family would forgive me, if we would ever rebuild what had been broken.
But I had to try.
For the sake of the family I still loved, for the sake of my stepson, who deserved better than the lie I had been living, I had to accept the consequences of my actions, no matter how hard they were to bear. There was no escaping the truth anymore.